I had to make a choice. Between which God I was gonna be my God. Like I that you know that food, it was either going to be one or the other, and because clearly every time I used food, it was like turning to a false God.
Hi, friends, I'm Dr. Carol. We all have to eat, but are you truly satisfied? So many in our world today struggle with food. Frankly, there was a time in my life when I struggled with food. When I was going through all my mess, food was among the options that I had. That was what I went to try and deal with my stuff, my feelings. And of course, that's not a healthy thing to do. We all are aware of the statistics that somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3 of Americans are overweight, and at least a third and growing number are obese. We've just been through a COVID-19 pandemic where food has been a challenge for many in greater ways than it was before. How do you deal with that? Is there a way to get out of the food restrictive mindset and find real satisfaction? Well, in this episode, I talked with Dr. Rhona Epstein. She has a personal story that makes this very real to her, and she has now been working for over 30 years, helping people with disordered eating address those issues, deal with the feelings underneath, get rid of the obsessive thoughts about food, where food is the only thing you're thinking about, all day, and find real, lasting freedom and joy and healing. And she does this from a thoroughly Christian, biblical perspective. That is what is particularly unique and refreshing in the way Dr. Rhona addresses these ideas. Dr. Rhona has recently released a book, Satisfied Workbook, a spiritual guide to recovery and food freedom. So under this video, make sure to check the notes and find out more. But here is my conversation with Dr. Rhona. Well, Dr. Rona Epstein, it is a joy to have you on the program today. We're going to be talking about something that every single human being has to address. But first of all, it is just such a pleasure to talk with you and have you on our program.
Well, thank you for having me, Dr. Carol. It's so nice to meet you.
Yes. Food. Every one of us has to eat every day, or at least almost every day. And how that works into our whole life can be an issue. I know in my years of distress, food was what I went to. That was my, for lack of a better way to say it, drug of choice. It was never
Right.
something that took over my life completely as it does for some, but it was my drug of choice. And just all about how that works into our lives is something very personal to you, and something you now have spent many years in helping others find freedom from. I just like our audience to know a little bit about your story and how this did become so personal to you.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yes, it's really the good girl drug, right? Isn't it food, the good girl drug? So yes, well, thank you. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My story could fill a whole hour, so I'll try to be a little succinct. So basically, I grew up where food was sort of a central focus in my family. I didn't grow up in the Lord. I grew up Jewish, and there's no Jesus in my house. So
Yeah.
food was our God, so to speak. Everything was all about food, and food was fun, food was love, and food was everything, and a lot of junk food in my house. And I always joke around saying I think I came out of the room looking for ice cream. And so I was very fixated on sugar and sweets, and I was allowed to have as much of it as I wanted. And so in my life, I believe that some people, and I believe I'm one of these people, that some people can actually have like a physiological addiction to sugar. And I don't think that a lot of people really understand how addictive sugar really is. And most parents don't understand. I mean, we think it's not healthy, but I don't think it's just an issue of health or weight, that actually it's very hard to stop eating it if your brain is a certain way. And some people like myself, I just was hooked. and I was obsessed and preoccupied, hiding, sneaking, lying about it, and just certainly eating way too much. And as a child, I was eating so much sweets that I got to the place where I wouldn't even eat like normal food. I was like living on Pop Tarts, Captain Crunch, you know, spaghetti. All I ate was sugar and white flour, like
Yeah.
ice cream, cookies, everything. That was it, just junk. And somehow I was allowed. So by the time I got into my teen years, I had an eating disorder. Back in a day when eating disorders didn't have a name, and today we know eating disorders. But when I was 12, I went on a diet, and then that was the beginning of a downward spiral.
Wow.
So from 12 to 17, I was in that crazy cycle of trying to control my weight while being preoccupied with binging on junk food. So I was going between starving and binging and trying to control. And my mom was involved in that as well. She wanted me to be thin, so she helped me with my dieting insanity. And I create this whole world of lying and hiding, and just it was a really sick world. And it was eventually what led me to the Lord. So I bottomed out by the time I was 17, and I was at the point where I was wanted to die. That's how bad it got. I mean, I couldn't concentrate. I there was this feeling of constant defeat and despair, like every single day, promising I'm going to do better, and then falling again and falling again, eating half gallons of ice cream, boxes of cookies, jars of peanut butter, and vomiting and taking pills, and just hating myself, and feeling so discouraged. And eventually I ended up getting help, which led me to the Lord. And so that's the short story. The long story is that God, used that whole thing to teach me about Him,
Yeah.
and that He was what I needed, what I was using food for, to cope, and to leaning on food to manage my feelings, to escape. That God was my refuge and where I needed to go. And so my whole life, need to be transformed from depending on food to depending on God.
Wow. You
So
said some things there that just you're right. We could spend such a long time just unpacking those pieces. But using food to handle feelings, such a big deal.
mhm.
Um, yes, behaviors have consequences, but using food to handle feelings, that seems like such a bigger deal than only, counting calories and the food disorders that many people struggle with, whether they realize it or not. It's not so much about, what you eat as much as what you're eating says about what's going on under the surface and in your heart. Before we get into that a little more deeply, just like you to comment on what we've all been through this past year. There's the cliches, the COVID-19, and many people who have been through quarantine periods and various parts of the country that has been tighter than others, but just at home, stuck. Food has become more of an issue. Just comment on that for a minute, if you would.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are talking about using food for feelings, but certainly being bored and being lonely. I think feeling stuck and too anxious. I think there's a lot of feelings that people are using food too. I think there's something about the isolation
Yeah.
that it kind of almost gives permission. We're wearing sweatpants and pajamas, and we're not really putting our clothes on. And there's this feeling of like, well, nobody's going to see me. And I think people have become a little bit less caring about thinking sort of like, oh well, I'll get around to taking care of that, and sort of letting down. And I think the letting down is not just, I mean, of all disciplines, but so people who usually are used to taking care of themselves have less to have to, when you don't have the structure of getting up like you used to, or being somewhere like you used to. I think a lot of routines that people are used to doing, like going to the gym or even going just to work, people have now, people are working from home and the kitchen's right there.
Yes.
And it's just so easy just to go right in there and just have whatever you want. And people have learned about ordering, even though fast food restaurants were always everywhere and easily accessible, DoorDash has now become the big thing, and people just click and there it is, delivered right to your door, and you can order whatever you want and click, click, click. And so I do feel that there's something about just sort of becoming a couch potato in a sense. And now what I'm seeing with some of my clients as the world is starting to feel like it's opening up is this real fear about, I have put all this weight on and I'm scared to go back to work. Like, people are going to see me. I'm embarrassed. I'm ashamed. I'm anxious about starting back over and like breaking out of this horrible cycle that I've gotten myself into. People really hurt themselves
Yeah.
by using this and giving permission sort of to cope this way. And I think that's the thing. It's sort of like, just like, okay, well, if I'm not going anywhere, why should I care?
Good. I mean,
So,
you're talking about more feelings. This is so much about what's going on inside. Um,
right.
and you've referenced that you work with people with eating disorders, and you now have been doing that for over 30 years. So needed. In the people that you work with, what are some of the biggest under the surface heart issues that display themselves in unhealthy eating patterns?
Well, there's a number of them. I mean, I think uh, anger, resentment, fear, I think deep-seated self-hatred. There's oftentimes, people, I mean, there can be a lot of things that are going on for people, but those are some of the biggies. Deep insecurities. So a lot of times people have experienced childhood abuse or intense stresses, and food has just been a way of escaping from real pain.
Yeah.
And it's just because what's different about food than other kinds of addictive behaviors or comfort things is that food starts so young, so that, like, children, when their parents are fighting or there's an alcoholic parent or abuse going on, that food is a way of comforting yourself that you can learn from the time you're really young. And so it becomes like a reaction to all kinds of pain and stress, and the association between using food to manage pain, or of all kinds of emotional pains. Like, food becomes your friend and your escape. And it's like, so there's fighting downstairs and you're locked in a room with your goodies, and that's like taking care of you, and it makes you feel better. And now this is a paired association. Now you have this connection. This is how you're training yourself to manage all emotional experience, all pain. So
It would seem to me too that parents or caretakers only reinforce that. If the child is fussy, give them a bottle, give them a cookie, give them some candy, and that's the go-to for a child in distress. For some, for many, I think.
it's true. It's really true. And without realizing it, without understanding, especially if you're giving them addictive foods, like if you're giving them an apple, or if you're giving them, a healthy snack, like, a little bit of hummus with some healthy crackers or some carrots, that's not going to create the same problem. But when you hand them, cookies or candy, then that's where you end up having, then you hook them on something that's actually, now they're creating like these good feelings that are coming from the food. That is where a dependency happens.
Yeah. I want to spend more time talking about solutions here. And you have been working for many years in this area. You yourself have been through recovery and found the joy and freedom that that brings, and now have worked with many others. You've written some books on the topic. Most recently, you have brought the 12 steps that many people are familiar with substance abuse recovery, like AA. You've connected that with food. Not the only one to do that, but you do that in a powerful way, bringing Christian faith to bear specifically on this kind of a problem. You and I were talking just before we clicked record about how this really is a spiritual problem. Why do you think it's a spiritual problem? Unpack that for a minute.
Hmm. Well, I think it's a threefold problem. I think it's a physical problem in that that we have trouble with foods that are addictive and that actually physiologically we can't stop eating because they were purposely made so that we wouldn't be able to stop eating them. So I think it's physical and I think it's emotional, like
Sure.
we've been saying, but and spiritual in the sense that I think well, look, I think most of us, if we're human, we're going to struggle spiritually.
Mhm.
I mean, everybody struggles spiritually, right? We all struggle in our relationship with God, like we do with all of our relationships. We project things onto God, like we misunderstand God. We project our father images onto him, and or we think he's distant and he doesn't care, or other people's problems are more important, or we just don't know how to connect with him. Everybody goes through seasons of dryness or struggle, I think. And then I think too, there's a multitude of spiritual issues that are involved where somehow guilt and shame can block. Like if we're overeating and we get blocked with the shame of like I'm out of control and I'm hurting the body, the temple of the Holy Spirit, and then we feel like God won't like me anymore because I'm being bad, or like people do all kinds of things. So I mean, there's root issues in terms of I don't believe that God, like not knowing the love of God, instead going to another source for love, another God. In a sense, I think, and this is something I had to learn in my journey to recovery. Probably the most important thing I would say in the heart of my recovery was coming to the understanding that if I had to make a choice, between which God I was gonna be my God. Like that food, it was either going to be one or the other. And because clearly every time I used food, it was like turning to a false God. For me, I was depending on a false God. And I had to face that spiritually there was a wrong, my heart was wrong towards food. And when I understood that, if I wanted to have a real relationship with the living God, that I had to put away that 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 false God, that cheap, fake thing that I was using to satisfy myself.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's to come to know the love of God and to really know that that's the deep satisfaction, that's what my books are, my devotional is called Satisfied. And the workbook, which is the 12-step workbook, is called the Satisfied Workbook. But that's where that really comes. God is the true satisfier of our soul. And, so food just doesn't do it. It's just,
Mm.
it's the wrong food. There's a food, there's the spiritual food for your spiritual health, and then there's the physical food for your physical health, and you can't use one for the other. It
But we
doesn't work.
try to. Dr. Rona,
Right.
that is such an awesome arresting picture that many of us use physical food, often unhealthy food, to fill a hole that is not a food hole and it can't satisfy. So I love how you've taken the word satisfied and made that just kind of the headline of much of your recent work, because we are trying to satisfy something inside that food can't.
Right, exactly. That's right.
Mm.
And food can't. And that's why you have to keep having more and more and more and more and more, because you're trying to fill an empty, like a hole that doesn't get filled that way. And you just end up feeling bad.
Yeah. So it, you do this every day. It's a cornerstone of your therapy. But what are some keys that you help people understand in overcoming this? I mean, it's great to say we use food to fill a hole that's not a food hole, and we need to make God the God that we serve. Um, Make that a little bit more real. It sounds great, but just a little bit more practical. We can't get weeks of therapy in a quick video, but just give us a picture of what that has to look like.
Yeah, well, it really depends. I mean, you're right. We couldn't possibly tackle the whole thing, but it's complicated in the sense that with food issues, it's not one size fits all. And so, what a person actually needs to do with their food physically may be different depending on the person. So, in my work, I often people come to me because they are self-identified as having what I use the term food addiction, which is a controversial term, but I treat people who have seen that after trying everything and trying everything, they have come to a place of where they were like at the last station on the train, like, and they have come to the realization that everything is, they've tried all the diets, they've tried all the treatments, nothing is working, and we're looking at their relationship with food like a substance abuse problem, and start to understand this is what another spiritual thing, like people don't really understand the power of, like, we understand cocaine and heroin are addictive, so we're taught that from a really young age. Be careful about that. Don't use that. If you start using it, you might not be able to stop. But no one ever told us that about sugar. We were actually rewarded with sugar.
Mhm.
And we've been told from our early on that this is good and we celebrate with it. And we, like you said, we give it to kids to quiet them. And so we've always had very positive associations, but it is actually, according to science, sugar's 8 times more addictive than cocaine.
Wow.
So, with that being the case, if a person has come to a place where they're trying everything, part of what might be going on that's making it impossible to get their food to stop being all the cravings, the temptation to stop is they some like I don't eat sugar anymore because I believe it's like cocaine to me. So I've just celebrated 38 years of abstinence from sugar.
Wow.
And now in the world of people in eating disorders, they think that's like means that you're restricting. But for me, that's just drug addiction. Sugar is like I eat lots of food. I eat healthy food. I eat nourishing food. I don't starve myself. I'm not on a restrictive diet, but I don't eat the foods that are drugs to me, that once I start, I can't stop. So when I help people, I help them understand the difference between going on, like finding a healthy plan of eating that gets away from the foods that keep calling your name and seducing you into this addictive process.
Yeah.
So, sometimes a person, if you can't learn to eat it like a lady, so to speak, if you can't learn to eat it in moderation, maybe stop eating it, just get off it. And for me, that's how I have to be with sugar. And sometimes other kind of things like having boundaries, like clear boundaries, like eating at regular meals and not just eating haphazardly, but being routine and having like I eat 3 meals and I don't just eat like whenever, whatever. I eat healthy meals. I don't skip meals. I make sure I get all the nourishment I need in my meals. There's something about this is sort of more um, from years of people working on this area, understanding that people who abuse food need to be really careful to make sure to get what they need in their meals so they're not hungry looking then for something else. People get the diet mentality, they feel like I have to hurry up and lose weight. And that then they restrict their food and then they end up binging because they can't eat that little.
Yes.
And so you see how people get caught up in this obsession and it's partly about weight and it's partly about food. And to understand the whole process is just get off the diet thing, get away from the scales and start eating a whole foods, healthy way of eating, not restricting, but eat healthy and then have a support system. And I wrote the book the 12-step thing, but the satisfied workbook, but people doing that in groups, or using the 12-step groups. There's Christian 12-step groups, there's other 12-step groups for food. And I really recommend that people, because all the feelings that we were using food for, we need help with.
Yes.
So whether it's with a counselor or with people in a group who understand, I'm going to not use food. So how else am I going to cope with that lonely feeling or that angry, irritable feeling? If I'm not using food, what am I going to do? How do I practice a new way of thinking or coping, and learning to make the transition from the old way where you use food to a new way where you turn to God, or you have a new skill that you use for managing your anger or your fear. And there's so many things that you have to learn that food was doing. Food is doing so much for a person to shut down all of these emotions. So that's why a person really needs a lot of help. It's not that simple.
Yeah.
And so you can't just take the food away. You have to give a whole new lifestyle for what to do now without, when you take that coping mechanism away.
Dealing with the stuff that you were using food to try and deal with, of course, unsuccessfully. Um, you are very clear that relationship with God, the spiritual dimension, is a really important piece, an important piece for you. And for anyone who's open to that, it's a core of the writing and the satisfied workbook and so on that you do. I know that there are many probably who are watching and listening even to us right now, who have prayed about this a lot. Oh God, please help me. Please take away these food cravings. I hate myself. I'm dishonoring you. I please help. So that's not working. But what does work? What about this relationship with God needs to happen? And how do you help people walk that journey?
Sorry about my dog. I got a little interruption by my little Maltipoo here.
That's all right.
Okay, um, so yes, it's not that simple just to pray. I think there's a new level of dependence and reliance that we need to come to. That is um, the difference between just ask. I think God can. I mean, sometimes we've had these moments in our life with God where we ask Him to relieve us of a problem, and He does.
Yes.
And then we have other problems where, because it's such a stronghold, it teaches us to rely on Him in a much greater way. And I think that oftentimes food is one of those problems, especially if a person has continued to kind of seek Him for help, but keeps finding themselves struggling.
Mhm.
Facing that you need help, facing that you need a group of people, and you need like everyday, all day help and all day dependence, is, I'm so sorry, is such a big deal. Like, to be able to come to a place of saying, I rely on you all day, like to say, I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. I am a new creation. The old has passed away, and to um, not just cry out, but in terms of begging Him, but believing by faith that He has set you free, and actually seeing it in your mind, the truth of what His word says, that if He says you're free, you're free. But we have to not live in the experience that we've had of failure, but in the truth of what the word says. And I know it's a lot easier said than done. It's an exercise of faith and believing, to put on the word and the truth and to walk in it as if it's true, to get up in the morning and say, I believe by faith that today God is giving me the strength to do what I can't do in my own self, but His power is in me, and to believe it and walk it, and know that He's going to hold our hand and He's going to give us what we need. But we almost have to stay conscious of Him in it with us all day, because it's like an all day problem. It's just not something you can just say a little prayer, oh help me, and then walk into your day, when there's a million triggers all day long. So
You mentioned 38 years that you yourself, celebrating 38 years of sobriety from sugar. Um, and certainly just that part of the behavior is important. But I would guess that if that's the case, you are just not white knuckling on a daily basis, trying to hold out for one more hour, one more day, that this has become such a part of your lifestyle that there's freedom there. For you personally, Dr. Rona, what does the dailiness of walking with God, how does his relationship with him impact the dailiness of your life now after 38 years?
Well, I think for me, like food is not, it's like, and it's right. If food is in a separate category, like I know I need to eat my healthy foods and I need to not break with what I know I need to do. Like my routine needs to stay put, and my food and my life and my relationship with God, these things have to be separate. So like whatever's going on, and believe me, in the 38 years of abstinence, I've had a lot of life.
Yes.
And and a million excuses to
Yeah.
blow it. There's no end to the reasons. And I could tell you, if you want to sit down and listen to me, I can tell you all the excuses for blowing it, because I have many of them. Pain and trouble and trouble. And, life is like that, right? It's full of storms. There's storms. They keep coming, right? Nobody gets out of that. It's not like my life has been all, rainbows and sunshine. So, being able to know that I just have to keep my food solidly in its place. It's like an anchor. It just stays right solidly. I don't move my food with my feelings. It doesn't move. It doesn't bend. It stays where it stays. So when my father died in November, I packed my lunch and brought it with me on the day that I had to go and deal with the pain of my father losing I mean, before I walked out the door, my lunch was packed. While my tears were pouring out of my eyes.
Yes.
And my heart was broken. But I knew from so many people who lost their recovery during death
Mhm.
that I could not go into that hospital or around my family without what I needed to do for my food, because I know hospitals probably won't have what I need. So that has to be set. It has to be right there. And then when I feel sad, God is where I have to go with my pain. So it's every day. It's starting the day with asking him for help. I don't miss a day. Every day before I eat my breakfast, I acknowledge to God, please help me with another day, because I believe it's like his mercies are new every day, and I believe that my recovery is from him.
Yeah.
I don't believe that I'm like some superstar person who like has it. I believe it's like a work, a miracle. I see how bad people struggle. And the fact that I live freely today and that I don't fight with food, I know it's a miracle.
Mm.
That I've learned to do this, it's a miracle. So I acknowledge before him every day that I need him to remain in the driver's seat in this area, because I don't believe it's me doing it. I believe it's him. So I
What you
ask him for
outlined
another day.
in the last few minutes, Dr. Rona, just what this means for your life, ups and downs. Food is its place, it doesn't move. And instead of going there with your pain, you go to God with your pain. Incredibly practical, incredibly real, and so helpful. Um, I have a feeling there's a whole lot more that we could talk about, but I want to give you opportunity to let people know how to connect with you and Satisfied Workbook. Where can people go to find out more?
Well, my books are all over wherever. So Amazon or my I have a website, is drrhona.com, drrhona.com. And so that's where you can find, like, I have a Facebook page with a group called Overcoming Overeating on the Facebook page that, people are on. And we've been going through the workbook together. So I have 3 books. There's Food Triggers, and then that was the first book. And then there's the Devotional Satisfied, which is a 90-day devotional. It's an active devotional, which really helps a person get a jump start. It's like kind of for the person who's sort of not ready to give up the food, but get your heart and your mind sort of
Good.
in that place of readiness to change, and kind of helps you spiritually, like with that whole, I want to give up, but I don't want to give it up. And it's like we need God to really like soften our hearts towards change, and that's what that book is really for. And then the workbook is going through the 12 steps with scriptures and different examples and stories of people working the 12 steps that way. So I tried to write it in a way that makes it super easy to work the steps, the best I could. So so anywhere you want get books, that's where my books are. So
Awesome. And we will make sure that the links to those resources are in the notes with this episode. So just if you're, driving or running or, however you're accessing this, just check the notes and we'll make sure the links are there as well. Well, Dr. Rhona, it has been so refreshing and joyful and encouraging to talk this through with you. There's just so much richness in your story and what you have to share and the message you are helping other people find freedom with. Just many, many blessings to you and those you work with and minister to, and keep writing. We need this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm happy to be able to share with people. Hope it's been a help to people. So
God bless
you
you
so much. God bless you.
Thank you, friends, for joining me. So glad that we can talk about finding the true kind of freedom that God makes available and how you can cooperate with Him in finding that. Check the resources under this video. Check out Dr. Rhona and her books. And I want you to know that I love to hear from you. You can use the link in the notes below to send me a personal message. I respond personally. I'd love to hear from you and let you be an ongoing part of our online family. And until next time, may God bless you.